Light of the day, obviously. Jonathan Gibson, political commentator, Harrison Orman-Varty, Conservative Borough Councillor, joined me this morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
First one, isn't it? Post-election, I think. Is it? That's what
it is for me.
Yeah, for you, yeah.
I think maybe I did one post-election. I think I did one post-election. Right. I know you've had a couple of weeks of no work.
I ran away because I have to say the election was hard work, and obviously I was working in the central office and I was supporting Richard and Nigel and the rest of the candidates as well. So it was nice to have a break. But obviously, the minute I leave this country, look what happens. Yeah, the whole thing, it all goes to pot. Let's just start with Keir Starmer if we can. I've been talking about this morning because whilst I was away, I tried so hard not to listen to the news whilst I was away, and then it obviously reached a stage where actually I had to pay attention to what was going on. And I just kept feeling that this was lazy journalism about far right, and then the Prime Minister blaming the far right for what was going on. And I just thought this just doesn't, it's too superficial. It doesn't really explain really what is going on. Now, Keir Starmer has suffered a sharp slump in popularity after criticism of his handling of the riots. His approval ratings have plummeted in the fortnight since the unrest broke out. So the proportion of voters with a strongly unfavourable view of him rose by 6 points. Basically, he has been criticised. He was too slow. He didn't convene Cobra. Also, as I say, the lazy language and calling it far right. How's he done?
Well, I think he's been put in a awful situation for the first time of his first few weeks of his administration. I mean, you have these riots. People generally are more disapproving of administrations when things do go wrong. You know, you've had this, you've had a series of stabbings, you've had really bad crime. Obviously, with the budget was a big hit, which they took from Rachel Reeves's popularity has sunk because of the, for example, winter fuel allowance. But again, that was...
Well, they caused it, didn't they?
Well, they had a $22 billion pound black hole. I don't know why I said
well,
dollar.
So they say, but they would have known that. So they said. But they would have known that before they went.
Of course they would have known that, but that's why they remained abstract on their promises, like every party.
But hang on a minute, isn't the issue here that actually, day one, they removed Rwanda, they actually removed the Bibi stockade, they effectively grant amnesty to everyone, 100,000 people, and then people are upset?
Well, that's because there's bad policies, and I don't think this is anything to justify...
There's no alternative.
As in, I think they're awful policies, but I don't think there's also any justification whatsoever for what's being broken out on the streets. You can't say, oh, something's a bad policy, so then you can go and burn things down.
I totally agree.
It's just an excuse.
I agree with what you say, in the sense of, yes, all right, he's had a bad hand with the riots and stuff, but sure, but it's how you respond to those. And I think the way he's responded to them has been poor, which is indicative of his poll rating at the moment. And I think...
Why is it poor?
Because if I was Keir Starmer, if I was the Prime Minister, I would address the riots, because you have to, because if there's unrest, you have to address it.
And we all agree they're unacceptable.
He's only addressed the symptom, but not the cause. He should have said, look, this is wrong, you know it's wrong, you're harming your own communities, you're doing no good. However, I'm going to level with you all. I get it, right? And I would say to him, look, you've been... If he wanted to make it a political point, he could have done. He said, you've been, you know, election after election, false promises from the Tories, if he wanted to say that, with the migration. We're really going to look at this. We're not going to do, you know, political games with Rwanda, if he wanted to say that. We're going to really try and find a constructive solution to make sure immigration... That's how he should have done it. He should have said, look, it's bad. We kind of get why you're angry. We don't get why you're doing it, but we get why you're angry. And that is why we are looking at these steps to kind of diffuse the situation. He didn't do that. It was just like, you're thugs, you're thugs, you're thugs, you shouldn't be doing it. You're far right, we're going to be bringing out this, we're going to do this. And it's almost... That's why you get the two-tier policing, because when you had the hair heels stuff, it was almost like this was not the response.
OK, let's... I
mean, a lot of it is just racism, isn't it? Most of the people that are being attacked are not even asylum seekers or immigrants whatsoever. They're literally just people of colour in this country.
Let's just address that. So, Keir Starmer, I think that's a really valid point. Keir Starmer essentially should have done that, I think. He should have said, look, this is unacceptable and you are attacking your own communities, and I completely understand immigration is far too high. And he didn't do that. But he labelled everyone who went on peaceful demonstrations, he labelled them all as far right.
Firstly, I don't think a lot of them were very peaceful. And secondly, I'd say...
But there were lots of people there who didn't engage in violent attacks, who are worried about the pace of change in this country and the amount of immigration.
Sure, and that's, you know, there's always going to be people who engage in protests about whatever, and
but the vast majority were peaceful.
Yeah, but there were significant numbers, like such high numbers that were chanting, were joining. I wouldn't join a protest
on both sides.
In which,
the
levels of violence were not. Firstly, the levels of violence were absolutely not equivalent on both sides, and secondly, like there's no equivalent in this. In 2011, when there were riots taking place, for example, Nigel Farage came out and said, "Oh, we need to bring all the police in. We need to be really, really tough on them. We need to slam down on these protests."
I fundamentally disagree.
I mean, that's a fact. He did come out and say that.
You look back. No, but even just on the right. riots, you look back a month before, it was the Hare Hills riots. That was so violent, and that was by a Muslim community.
As in, there wasn't hundreds taking place all across the country, and that, again, it needed a strong, hard
never
response.
happened, though, did it?
Yes, and I say to people who try to excuse those or condone those, to say, oh, but, like, we need to look at the roots of this, which are in the Middle East, so actually the way to solve this is redress our Middle Eastern policy. You can't have it both ways. Like,
but let's be very clear, because there are protests on both sides of this, and you're right, because it was hijacked by thugs. Without a doubt, it was hijacked by thugs. But at the same time, Reform UK Central London offices have also been targeted. Yeah. So they were targeted by activists as part of these anti-racism protests. So again, we've got other people who are engaging in protests against a right-of-centre party, and that is unacceptable.
Of course it is.
Why can't you engage in protests?
Well, because they were targeted by activists. The whole thing has got way out of control, because what Starmer should have done, I think, is deal with that. And actually what Harrison says is to be very clear that actually we do understand there is, and this has been simmering for a long time, hasn't it? That's the problem.
So would you say the same thing in regard to if someone carried out something violent over, for example, the Middle East, and someone carried out an attack on that, would you say, oh, the solution to this is maybe changing policy rather than saying, oh, simply what you did is just disgusting?
No, but we're talking about domestic issues in this country, and so it is the acknowledgement that actually people don't recognise this country. And when you feel very frustrated and you see that actually the government doesn't take immigration seriously, Boris Johnson wrote that editorial, didn't he, saying that Keir Starmer is deaf to immigration.
I fundamentally think the roots are actually very different to immigration. If you look at it,
the root is immigration.
No, it is. The correlation is where there's more economic deprivation. It's not where there's more immigration whatsoever.
But they're linked. They're linked, aren't they?
Oh, of course they are. I mean, don't get me wrong. Some people in this country will look for an excuse for why their life sucks, right? Yeah. That happened towards the end of the Tory government. Their life sucks. It's the Tory government. I'm going to grow up in these bloody Tories, right? That was the sentiment. I get that, but you have no doubt that it's these communities that are having the harshest impact of immigration. You know, if you look at, for example, in Leeds, where there's been high density of immigration, where they are struggling to, for example, buy a house, where they are struggling to get a GP appointment, those are the communities. The areas, for example, where I live, right, out of in Surrey areas, where immigration is a pretty, a rate which isn't too high, we haven't necessarily felt the impact of high immigration, I would say. So, although
you don't see it.
You don't see it as much. It's a higher income area, sure, but they're not. I wouldn't say that they're linked at all.
I mean, look at places like Hull, right? That's overwhelmingly white, and they're obviously very angry about the fact that they've suffered terribly, and I'd imagine they're like part of the people that are coming out today. That's not because of high immigration there. There isn't high immigration
So yesterday someone said that this is about unfairness, and there's a brilliant report that was written by Lord Tony Sewell, as he was then, Lord Sewell now, and he talks about that deprivation rather than ethnicity is actually the root cause of this, and that is true. It's the fact that actually it's poor, white working class kids who've been left on the scrap heap see the unfairness of people coming into this country illegally, being given board and lodging and being looked after by the government, and they have nothing.
Sure, but then don't blame it on the immigrants who are coming in, who firstly are not living in this luxury.
No, but they're blaming it on the government for allowing unfettered access to this country and removing any barrier to that.
No, but the blame isn't, in fairness, the blame isn't on the immigrants.
Correct.
The anger isn't saying, to be fair, they would understand the logic of saying, you know what, if I was given that opportunity, I might have done the same. What white working class people said, if that was the same opportunity, I might fall in it. The problem is they're saying to the government is that we have consistently voiced against immigration at every general election since 2010 and not got what we wanted. That is the fundamental issue. And I'm sorry, and final point, on the working white kids, white working class boys, which are the most disadvantaged in the UK at the moment, they are completely forgotten about. There's, for example, if you're a disadvantaged family, if you're from a black household, it's almost like black leadership programs, black, all this. But it's like, but white working class kids have got no chance.
Actually, there's another point to that. Actually, that immigration into this country has been a success story, and actually, people who have come into this country tend to work hard and have a good educational attainment. But you're right; it's the white working class that have been left behind, and something needs to be done. Now, the question is that I do think there is an element that Keir Starmer is learning, that being the Prime Minister is very different to being leader of the opposition. Words really do matter, and he's learning that. But just in terms of how he moves forward, how can he unite Britain?
Well, I think the roots of a lot of the unrest, firstly, it's not excusable, but I think what we need to change is economic structure and the economically disadvantaged people, and I think he hopefully is trying to work to do that. Things like building more homes, things like trying to move opportunities away to other more disparate areas. And I think he needs to take a really harsh and really strong stance against this, because I think that's really important. The majority of people do not support these.
But he alienated me as well as an onlooker by labelling everyone as far right.
But I think the people who are coming out, who are agitating, who are creating absolute chaos and burning down hotels.
But it's a
and things
minority, isn't it?
Regardless, does it matter if it's a minority or not? It's that they are far right thugs.
What were started off as peaceful protests.
Yeah. The point you just made about the addressing inequalities is also all underwritten by high immigration. No one has a problem with successful mitigated immigration like it used to run at in this 40, 50,000 area, right? But like, for example, you just said then about building homes. There is no point in building homes if you have net at 750 and you have a population that's kind of growing on its own anyway, and you're building 300,000. It's
well, the numbers are you have to build a house.
No,
a
but
minute.
have you looked at, for example, the people who are propping up the NHS? Have you looked at the people?
So
who
train our own. Stop
right, but that's
importing cheap
unbelievably
labour.
expensive.
No, it isn't. It's actually the will. It's the government's will. Stop relying on cheap imported labour. Actually, make sure those 9 million economically inactive people in this country get a job in this country.
But David, you can also do both. Why not just say, if you want to come to this country and you're a doctor or a nurse, you can. But everything else,
but again,
you know, for example, dependents, you can't come. You know, but you know, all these sort of, why is there just a black and white, none or loads?
Let Jonathan.
Why is it?
It's completely different. Firstly, you're not categorising different people, for example, asylum seekers versus immigrants. And we can talk about the high-skilled immigrants, the university students who come across, who we do want, who prop up our university systems.
Yeah, but shouldn't bring dependents, though.
As in they don't. They're not allowed to anymore. That's stopped. That's changed.
Yeah, and it has reduced.
It has, but the system could be easily played.
And that is one of the big advantages to get in people who are in high talent in fields that we really need.
I agree.
And industries that we really want. So we're neglecting, when we think of immigrants, a lot of people just think about people coming over in small boats. The majority of immigrants are high-skilled workers who are providing a lot to this country. And secondly, in terms of your point about propping up the NHS and propping up that we can do both. If you look at systems like Australia, the reason they have amazing healthcare is because they don't need to spend tons of money on their own healthcare education systems, and rather they can rely on bringing in people, which has actually been a very effective solution.
It's lazy.
Because it is lazy. It's an unbelievable healthcare system in which I would take over trying to.
But remember, Australia's been very tight on immigration. I do actually have to draw this to a halt because I have to go to a break. Otherwise, I'm in serious trouble as well, and will be excommunicated. Stay with us. More Future Politics panel after this break. Is this is talk 8:54 Sunday, August the 11th. Right, let's talk more about Reform UK. Reform UK's central London offices were targeted by activists as part of widespread anti-racism protests on Saturday. This is Samira Ali, the national organiser of Stand Up to Racism, said, "We're standing here today to send a message to Nigel Farage and Reform UK. We believe he's fanning the flames of bigotry and Islamophobia. We're drawing a line in the sand." Is he?
I think he is. I think he's inflaming... Well, I think he's doing this thing where he's kind of inflaming tensions and pushing those who... whistling to kind of these racist thugs whilst also maintaining plausible deniability. I think we've seen that after everything happening. He said, oh, like, I wonder if the police, they're hiding something, you know, maybe he's an asylum seeker, he's following things like Andrew Tate and other really inflammatory people.
He's asking questions.
Saying, right, but again, like, you can ask questions, like the blood libels questions, oh, maybe the Jews killed the babies and whatever, but when you ask questions, they can be done in an incredibly inflammatory and whistleblowing to racist way.
Is there, and I mentioned this earlier, is there a learning curve here from Nigel as well, because he's no longer the maverick outsider, he's now a member of Parliament?
Yeah, I think so. I think he'll probably find that you know, and he'll always get with the "why aren't you in Clacton, why aren't you in Clacton?" That will consist for the next 5 years. I personally don't agree with that. I think Nigel Farage has captivated the right, and I would say, look, definitely elements of the far right will have voted for him. There's no doubt about that. But I feel like he's captivated for the right reason, in the sense of, look, don't go out and riot. Instead, vote. You know, vote for me. Right? Not saying that I'll embody the far right, but I might be a good option rather than you rioting and thuggery. Because if Nigel Farage didn't exist, and the only right-wing option was the Conservatives, the riots would have been much worse because they would have felt like they've got no voice.
That's really interesting. I just want to talk about standards in public life, actually, and of course this comes on the riots. This is shocking footage. This is a thug who spat at a bus driver, which is totally unacceptable. He called him a terrorist B-word. There was Islamophobic abuse and threats whilst challenging him to get off the bus. Have a listen to this.
You Muslim, you Muslim terrorist, you Muslim terrorist, you Muslim. You get off the bus! You get off the bus, big man! You get off the bus! 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 You son! You terrorist! You Muslim! You Muslim! You Muslim! You terrorist! Everywhere! You are terrorists! You are Muslim! The bus! Get off the bus!
Calm, brother, please, just leave him alone, brother.
Get off the bus!
Just totally unacceptable, I think we can all agree. But also, I was reading this morning that coffee shop chain Pret a Manger is going to give staff members body cams to monitor people. What has happened to this country?
I mean, it's really scary, and this is why I think the stoking of this kind of rhetoric is very worrying. I mean, Farage's political hero, Donald Trump, has done
this
that
didn't come
in
from
America.
the stoking.
Oh, I mean, I'm sure a lot of it was.
Stoking.
I'm sure a lot of it came through online social media, in which you know there are plenty of people like Tommy Robinson, who Nigel Farage is trying to play this balancing game between not going too much towards him, but then not alienating these like protesters.
Isn't he just standing up for people and what people actually believe in, and saying that actually the pace of change in this country is too much? There is a big difference between what Nigel's doing and someone who spits at a bus driver.
No, there'll always be people. There'll always be people who are horrible, whether they're left or right. You know, like that person who's obviously horrible. There are people on the left who are equally as horrible, and they'll look for an excuse to go out and be nasty.
No, but there's tensions which can be inflamed. You can make someone go out and do that much more.
But Starmer is cracking down on the freedom of speech, and that will inflame tensions even more.
And by not addressing the far right, and by labelling everybody who has concerns about immigration as far right, causes events like that.
As in, that's firstly not true, because the far right thing came out after that guy did that sort of stuff, and actually that sort of stuff needs a strong start. And what you do when you have someone who's carrying out things like that, it's not go, oh, like, I'm so sorry, like, it must be because, you know, your community has been hit or whatever.
No,
you take a really hard stance. This is not one incident, this is hundreds and hundreds of incidents.
You take it hard on both. You say it's not acceptable, you shouldn't be doing this. However, I understand your anger. I don't, but regardless of your anger, you should not be doing it. That's how we should do that, and then address the root cause, not the symptom.
But what if the root cause is literally just racism, which in that case it was?
It's got nothing to do with race, it's numbers. It's numbers,
racism.
not race.
I have to cut in here. I have to let you continue this after the programme. Thank you very much to both of you. That's Jonathan Gibson there. Also, Harrison Ormond-Varty. Thank